making a ghost-shaped Halloween treat bag today, and this is actually a super easy one to do, but I like it because not only is it simple, but it is kind of adorable. I'll begin by cutting a 12-inch strip of twine. Then I'll cut the bottom of the bag to 3 3/16 inches across, and this is just a straight circle, 3 3/16. And then I cut 2 black eyes that are 1 5/16 from one edge to the other. I cut 2 square patches that are 1 3/4 inches across. And then I cut 2 white rectangles into 6 1/4 by 6 13/16. This will be the height of the ghost. And then I'll go through and I'll press all of my fabric. When I press my patches, I'll not only press them flat, but I'll fold over all of the sides so that when I stitch this on, that it will have a nice clean edge. And I press it over at about 1/4 of an inch. Now I'll start with my black thread in my machine because I need to attach those eyes to my ghost. And I'll do that using a zigzag stitch and go just right on the very edge of my eye. I try to keep the stitches pretty close together. I don't mind it looking a little bit rough at the edge, but I don't want it to be too rough either. When placing the eyes, I have them 2.5 inches up from the bottom and about 1/4 of an inch apart. This might seem a little bit low, but once you fold over the top and cinch down the twine, you'll see that it actually makes the curve work a lot better with the lower eyes. Now I'll switch my thread to white so that I can do the rest of the bag. You can really place the patches anywhere. I place mine down kind of on the corner below the eye, like 3/4 of an inch up from the bottom and just a little bit in from the side. And then on the back, I place it up about 2 1/4 inches and slightly off to the side as well. This is really just a matter of personal preference on these ones. I like to have mine angled. It feels just a little more artistic to me. Using my white thread, I do a straight stitch about 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the patch and just work around all 4 sides. I repeat that same process on my other patch. Now I'll place the front and the back of the ghost together with the wrong sides together, and I'll put a little mark on one side that's down by 1 1/4 of an inch and 1 3/4 of an inch. And that will provide the spot where I can put in my drawstring. So I'll continue to pin up the rest of the ghost, and I'll repeat that process on the other side, but I won't worry about leaving a gap for my drawstring. Now I'll stitch along the edge with a 1/4 inch seam, and I'll do the same on this side, but I'll leave this space undone. Now I'll use my iron to just open up that part of the seam that I left unstitched. And I want to open that up just enough so that I can make sure there's no rough edges showing through. Now I'll take my ghost and make him inside out. And then I'll press right along those seams that I just made. I want them to be nice and flat. I like to use a chopstick to run it along the inside of that seam there, and I feel like that does a good job of making it press out. And then I press over the top. Now I'll place my pins in just as a reminder of the area that I don't want to stitch, because again, I need that drawstring to go through here. It's pretty obvious where that point is. And now I'll go along my 2 sides again, and this time I'll stitch it back 1/2 of an inch. So I've got 1/2 an inch from the edge, then the gap, 1/2 an inch, 1/2 an inch, all the way down on the opposite side. I don't worry about pinning it, but you could if you wanted to. Now without making any crease in it, I try to press that seam towards the back of the ghost. So I just kind of use the tip of my iron for that. And then I'll do the same thing on the opposite side here. Now I'll take the top edge and I'll fold it over by about 1/4 of an inch, and I'll press it down at that point. And I'll continue around the entire top. Now that I have a nice fold on that top portion, I'll fold it over again, folding it just above that open part, and so that this goes down just below the open part. Once I have it approximately where I want it, then I'll go through and iron it one more time to kind of hold it there. Now I'll pin it to hold it nicely. Now I'll stitch just along this bottom edge here, and I want to do it just a little bit offset from the edge. And then I'll go back and I'll do another seam right along this edge at, again, about 1/8 of an inch. Now what I want to do is pin in my bottom. And I like to start doing that right at one of the seams. It doesn't always match up perfectly. In fact, generally speaking, the body is just a little larger than the bottom. So I want to make it so that there can be even gathers in there. So I go directly across from where I put my pin so that I can do the opposite side. And then I just start to fill in the rest of mine. And I do have little larger portions here, which is fine because I'll just have pleats along the way. I want that so that at the bottom it kind of comes out from the bottom. And I just make sure that when I go the center of this, I'm also going at the center of this so that those pleats are even. If you wanted to, you could stitch in a line and gather it. I feel like with the kind of rustic look, it's not really that necessary. I do put a lot of pins in at this point because it can be very easy for this to move as I'm stitching. Now I'll stitch a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance right around that bottom portion. Now I'll take my bag and I'll make it right side out. And again, I like to use the chopstick for this. I just feel like it does a really good job of pressing that seam out. But it's still blunt, so I don't have to worry about it going through the fabric. I've also used like crochet hooks for this. Now I'll take my length of twine and I'll wrap just a little bit of tape around the top of it. I've done this with masking tape, scotch tape, it doesn't matter, just as long as it's a little bit of tape. And I wrap it around it, usually a couple of times, just to make sure it's a little bit more rigid. Then I take a medium-sized safety pin and I'll poke that through both the twine and the tape. If I tried to put this through just the twine, then it would just unravel it. It wouldn't actually be able to grab, but that tape makes it so that it works better. And then I'll find the point on my seam that's open and I'll slide my pin through it. So I'll feed it through the gap, and because the safety pin is so rigid, I'm able to kind of work my fabric over the top of it, and it'll pull that twine along with it. The hardest parts to get past are the seams. And for this portion, I'll actually shoot past this a ways. Because of the way I fold that seam over, it makes it just a little bit more difficult here. And at this point, I try to get my safety pin to go back up the way that I put it through. So I'm taking it backwards through there. And the hope is that I can bring that twine with it. Because my safety pin opened up, I lost my twine right at that edge. Now I happen to have some hemostats that are left over from my days of being a nurse, and these are actually such great tools for this kind of a thing. I actually really recommend them for anyone who does crafting, but you could do some tweezers if you wanted, or maybe needle nose pliers. So then I'm able to just pull that through. If my safety pin had stayed together, I would have been able to do it with that, but this is a good second option if you have the same problem. And I pinch that kind of tight just so that I can get my ends together here, and then I'll knot it. So now that is all it takes to make a cute little ghost bag that is perfect for putting your Halloween treats in.